Awesome. All right, so where we're going to pick up today is on page 58 in the chapter, How It Works. And so one of the things is we're going to really be breaking down how it works. And that might feel a little redundant, because I know that in different parts of the world, in different meetings, we have sort of different sort of cultures and ways we open the meeting. But in my part of the world, how it works is a staple that is read at the start of every meeting. And excuse me, if you're one of those people that grew up with the cartoon of the Peanuts, like Charlie Brown and Snoopy, if you remember the teachers that they had when the teachers were talking that sound, it was and I don't know about you, but at least for me, sometimes I'm not always a spiritual giant. I'm rarely a spiritual giant, but when How It Works is being read, it sounds a little like wah, 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 wah. And there's a lot of information that just it gets missed, and that I missed, and so for those that don't read How It Works at every meeting, this will be fun. It'll be a new thing too, so it'll be great for everyone. And so I don't know about you guys, but my experience with the first paragraph in How It Works was a little negative, right? There's something about the human brain that attaches to the perception of negativity. I have a friend who describes it as being a lot like Velcro. So negative thinking is like Velcro, and positive thoughts are a lot like Teflon. They just slide right off. And that's not an alcoholic thing. I think that's a human thing. And so as we read through this first paragraph, we're going to have a new experience with it. Because I don't know about you, but when I heard this first paragraph in How It Works, I was like, uh-oh, I'm hopeless. And I'm one of those alcoholics that is just constitutionally incapable, and it was all bad news. But the reality is, this first paragraph has a lot of hope, and it has a lot of promise. And so we'll break it down. And so for those who are just joining us right now, we're on page 58, and we're starting at the very start of How It Works. And it says, rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path. Dude, right away, that's good news. Rarely have we seen a person fail. Rare. It would be rare to see someone fail if they thoroughly followed our path. One of the things, what is our path? What is the path that we have here in 12 Step? Well, if I go across the page, 59, our path is laid out there. So it says, rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly worked these 12 steps as a way of life. That's what it's saying. Now, you might go into the rooms and you might hear people say, Bill Wilson, he said if he could have changed anything in the big book, he would have changed rarely to never. And that's not true. I mean, it sounds good, but it's not true. You can listen to a talk by Chuck Chamberlain, Chuck C, and he actually asked him about some of these things. And you know, Bill knows people like us. If you tell me never, do you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go out of my way to be the exception. I'm going to be like Little Miss 12 Step. I'm going to be absolutely perfect, and then I'm going to burn it to the ground just to spite you. So he said rarely, but he meant rarely. But also, one of the things is really sort of gleaming the meaning of what we're talking about in this first paragraph. I like to do this thing called, I like to Missy Elliott it, which is a really obscure reference. If you remember in like the early 2000s, there's that rapper Missy Elliott, and then she had that song where she was like singing, and then she's like, and we flip it and reverse it, and she reverses it, right? And so that's what we're going to do, where we're going to reverse the sentence to glean the meaning. So let's reverse it. Often have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly set their bum on a fourth step and not done anything else. And is that not our experience, right? Is my experience that it has been rare for me to see somebody fully all in doing this work as a way of life. And often have I seen people relapse who haven't been doing this work. And that's not a judgment. That's just the nature of alcoholism. And so we read this, those who do not recover are people who cannot or will not completely give themselves to this simple program. Again, let's Missy Elliott. Those who do recover are people who can and will completely give themselves to this simple program. So all that is asked of me to recover is to do this work, do these 12 steps. And it goes on to say, usually men and women who are constitutionally incapable of being honest with themselves. And then I know I had this experience, and so many of my sponsees have this experience. We read these constitutionally incapable of being honest with themselves. That must be me. I automatically think that I must be one of these rare few that can't do it. And here's why. I think in a lot of cases, here's why. Because one of the things that we alcoholics have in common is saying, that's it, I will never drink again. And that having no effect. One of the characteristics of alcoholism is what we described in step 1 with the mental obsession. That insane thought that I have when I am as sober as I am today, that tells me this time will be different, that tells me nobody will ever know, that tells me I can go out for 3 drinks, that tells me I just got to get it out of my system, right? And for those that just joined us, we're in How It Works on page 58. And we confuse the mental obsession with us not being capable of being honest with ourselves, right? And so what does it mean to be able to have that my constitution is essentially my makeup, right? At the depth of my being. And what does it look like for an alcoholic to be constitutionally capable of being honest with themselves? It's not being able to play the tape to the end or think the drink all the way through, because I'm not capable of that. You know what it is? To be constitutionally capable of being honest with myself as an alcoholic is to be like, whoa, I am in trouble. I watch my language, but I would be using an F word right now. Like, I am in trouble. I can't do this thing on my own. That's what that level of honesty looks like. But it's also important to understand, we just read step 2 in the last few weeks. And I can apply that second step proposition to this. And what I mean by that is, like, even if at the core of my being I am constitutionally incapable with self-honesty, is it possible that the God of my understanding, or the God that is on offer in 12 steps, is bigger than that? Probably, especially if I took that second step proposition all the way to its conclusion, where God is everything or else God is nothing. God must be bigger than my alcoholism, and God must be bigger than any dishonesty that I might have. But yeah, when we're talking about that dishonesty, it's not that cash register dishonesty. It's not that infidelity dishonesty. No, it's, can I be honest with myself about the situation that I'm in? That if I don't have a spiritual awakening, I will drink again. That's what we're talking about. And it says there are such unfortunates. And it says they are not at fault. There's no judgment. There's no shame. They seem to have been born that way. It says they are naturally incapable of grasping and developing a manner of living which demands rigorous honesty. So again, what is needed for me to be able to recover in this thing? Well, to grasp and develop, I don't have to have it all at once. I can grow it. And I will grow it, because this is not an overnight matter. This is a way of life that will continue for my lifetime. And that demands rigorous honesty. And most of us didn't come here with rigorous honesty. You know, it was a practice, and it was something, at least for me, that happened to me. I didn't do it. I didn't get honest. I worked these steps to the best of my ability, and honesty came. And the more I leaned into these actions, the more I became capable of honesty. And it grew from there. And so again, all that is asked of you, and again, it tells me that this whole 12-step deal, I really like talking about this because I think it's funny, but this whole 12-step deal is not crockpot sobriety. I can't set it and forget it. You know what I mean? I can't work a set of steps and leave it. I got to have stir-fry sobriety. I got to be in there and moving it and working it every day. And if that's not how crockpots and stir-fries work, I'll keep coming back. I do a lot of microwaving. Anywho, as it talks about how that this is a way of life, a manner of living, way of life I'm never done. And so it says their chances are less than average. So even if at the core of my being, I am constitutionally incapable of being honest, my chances are not nothing. My chances are below average. Now, if we go back to forward to the second edition, it tells us, it tells us what the early percentages were from 1939 to 1955. And it was about 75%. So, I mean, less than average, right? Your chances are still good. But again, most of us are not constitutionally incapable of being honest with ourselves, especially if we're zooming in to listen to me natter for about an hour or so. You know what I mean? I always joke with my sponsees that no, you cannot be constitutionally incapable because you need to be truly desperate to be asking me for help. You know what I mean? You gotta be out of options if you're asking Paige. And that might sound like I'm being self-deprecating. I'm not. I'm going hard with my sponsees in the steps. We're working daily. We're doing this daily. Like, it's a pain in the butt to work with me. We're doing a lot. You know what I mean? So if you're asking me for help, I promise you, you're not constitutionally incapable because you're pretty desperate. All right. And it says, there are those too who suffer from grave emotional and mental disorders. And when we're talking about grave emotional and mental disorders, grave means fatal. So we're talking about those really serious mental and emotional disorders. And many of us come to 12-step with those, right? That's not a stranger to, addiction, alcoholism, and poor mental health working together. But then again, it says many of them do recover if they have the capacity to be honest. Again, what is the honesty that is required? Just that self-honesty, that I have this problem and I need this solution. And welcome those who just joined, still on page 58. All right. It says our stories disclose in a general way what we used to be like, what happened, and what we are like now. And sometimes we go to the rooms and we hear, oh, it was like what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now. No, we're not talking about it. We're talking about what I was like. And what I was like is essentially my alcoholism, right? What did it look like? And for those that are new and maybe new to the program or new to the study or what have you, I just want to kind of lay some step one foundation as well, right? What we're talking about was what was my experience with the physical allergy. Once I started to drink where I needed more, and the more that I drank, the more that I needed to drink, and I could not control the amount that I took. And what was my experience with that mental obsession when I said I was never going to drink again? And I drank again. That's what it was like. And then what happened is the 12 steps to have a spiritual awakening. That's what happened. That's what I'm perhaps meant to share on. And then what I am like now. What does my life look like? What do I look like as the result? Thank you. Love you too. As the result of these 12 steps, right? And I don't know, at least for me, that changes how I show up to speak at meetings, right? And the message that I want to carry. And of course, I'm not perfect and absolutely, we all kind of do things differently, but yeah, that I really want to focus on the diagnostic criteria for alcoholism, on the steps in the spiritual awakening and the change that has happened to me. Now, this next sentence, this next little bit of our paragraph, this is so important. It says, if you have decided you want what we have, and we can turn that statement into a question, do I want what you have? Do I want what these people in AA and CA and in these 12-step fellowships, do I want what they have? And honestly, it's okay if it's like, no, I don't. I might suggest going to more meetings or different meetings. But it's okay if the answer is no, but do I want what they have? And it says, are willing to go to any lengths to get it. Do I want what you have? And am I willing to go to any lengths? And again, what are these any lengths? Well, we're going to see it across the page on page 59. Those are those any lengths. So I want that light that's on in your eyes. Maybe it's, and honestly, maybe for some people it is the car, maybe it is the career, maybe it is the marriage. But that freedom from the obsession for that first drink, that light that's on in their eyes, that ability to show up to life, and it's like they're wearing the world as a loose garment. They're not bound by the bondage of self. They can laugh at themselves and look other people in the eye. Do I want that? Now, this is an important question. And we're gonna bounce around the big book, which for those that know me is no surprise. We're gonna see this question asked again and again and again. So if you don't mind hopping around with me, let's go to page 90 for a sec. So in page 90, we're in the chapter working with others. And what we're talking about is we're meeting an alcoholic prospect, a brand new sponsee, and we're talking with them about you know, and really at this point, we're not even talking to the alcoholic, we're talking to the alcoholic member's family, but in modern 12-step, we're just talking to the alcoholic, right? And it's one, two, wait, I gotta count, 1, 2, 3, bottom of the third paragraph, right? It says sometimes it's wise to wait until he goes on a binge. The family may object to this, but unless he is in a dangerous physical condition, it's better to risk it. Don't deal with him when he is very drunk, unless he's ugly and the family needs your help, which tells us the level of 12-step that we did in those early days. Wait for the end of the spree, or at least a lucid interval. Then let his family or a friend ask him, and we'll see that this is the same question. If he wants to quit for good, and if he would go to any extreme to do so, right? And if the answer is yes, his attention to be drawn to you as a person who has recovered, because he might be willing to do the steps. Now, again, we're going to see that question again. So let's bounce around, because I think it's fun. Let's go to page 112, and we're in the chapter 2 Wives. And we're gonna be 1, 2, 3, third full paragraph. We can tell that my brain's at 100%. I'm like, I gotta count the paragraphs. And what we're talking about, it's the wife, and not really the wife. It is the non-alcoholic who's living and bound with the alcoholic, or bound to the alcoholic. They don't even have to be living together. And it's talking about, suppose the alcoholic fits the description of number 2. That just means one that might be willing to accept some help. It says the same principles which should apply to husband number 1 should be practiced. But after his next binge, and again, waiting for that window of willingness, you know, that after a bender, right? After I've burnt my life to the ground, when I'm filled with remorse and regret, I typically have that little window of willingness where I'm able to see the truth about myself most clearly. And I'm willing to take actions that I previously was not willing to take. It's saying, wait for that. Ask him if he would really like to get over drinking for good. Do not ask that he do it for anyone else. Just would he like to? Again, do you want what we have? And are you willing to go to any length to get it? And you might think I'm done bouncing around, but I'm absolutely not. Let's pop over to page 142. Oh yeah, absolutely. 142. And so what we're seeing is in that first paragraph, and we're approaching the possible alcoholic in the company. And it says, next, he can be assured that you do not intend to lecture or moralize or condemn. If that was done formally, it is because of misunderstanding. If possible, express a lack of hard feelings towards him. At this point, it may be well to explain alcoholism, the illness. Say that you believe he is a gravely ill person, again, fatally ill. With this qualification, being perhaps fatally ill, does he want to get well? You ask because many alcoholics being warped and drugged do not want to quit, but does he? Will he take every necessary step, submit to anything to get well, to stop drinking forever? And that is that question asked again and again and again. And I want you to know if you're like, oh man, these questions, it's a little intense and I don't know. It can be helpful to go back and look at step one, but to also know that the steps don't care if I'm scared. The steps do not care if I'm afraid. The steps do not care if I don't think they're a good idea. If I dive in, I will get well. And that has been my experience time and time again. So let's go back to page 48. We really went on a little bit of a bounce around there. So going back to that same paragraph, right? If you decided you want what we have and are willing to go to any length to get it, then you're ready to take certain steps. And again, what I was talking about there, where it's like, man, I don't know, I'm afraid. I don't know if this thing could work for me. I don't think I'm worthy of it. Again, time and time again, the book meets me where I am at and takes me where I need to go. It says, at some of these we balked. To balk is to begin to start an action and then to stop. So what that looks like is when we look at the steps, it's like, oh yeah, I'll do that one and that one. Oh dear God, not that fourth step. And then we sit right down. That's what it's talking about. And another description of balk, it's also a reference that's used in baseball. So for those who definitely came here for the sports portion of the Big Book study, sports. So in baseball, yeah, the pitcher, he is not allowed to make a motion to try to throw the ball and then stop. Once you've begun to throw the ball, you have to go all the way and throw the ball. And if you stop, you get a penalty. And I don't know what that penalty looks like, but maybe it's I don't know what it is, but you get a penalty. And man, I was like so confident with my sports, and I'm like, oh, I lost it. I don't know what penalties are called in baseball. Errors, I think. I don't know. But you start to throw, and if you stop, you get a penalty. Another really good visual is if you've ever seen horses and horses running, and imagine the running or, show jumping where they jump over the fences, and that horse like galloping and cantering full speed toward the jump, and in the last minute or put their hooves down or like, absolutely not, right? And the rider sometimes gets tossed, and that's what it's talking about, to balk, to attempt to move towards something and to stop. And one of the things is free base. So if you are a pitcher and you balk, you get a free base advance, which I believe means that the batter gets to go to first base. Yes, yes, that is teamwork, making the dream work with the sports. Thank you so much. All right. And one of the things is often at meetings, this is how this sort of part of the book is read, right? Where it's like, we thought we could find an easier, softer way, but we could not. With all the earnestness at our command, we beg of you to be fearless and thorough from the very start, right? But we're missing some emphasis, right? I know I'm pronouncing it wrong. It's quoting that movie. We put the wrong emphasis on the wrong syllable. We're missing that like emphasis, right? So we thought we could find an easier, softer way. And I can ask myself, is that my experience? Did I try to find an easier, softer way? Did I try just going to meetings? Did I try other outside things? Did I try getting into a relationship? Yep. Did I try getting out of that relationship? Yep. Did none of that work? Did I try moving from Calgary to Lethbridge? Yep, it's just windier and I'm still a problem there. You know what I mean? If you don't know what Lethbridge is, it's just windy. And I'm an alcoholic wherever I go. But did I try these ways? And did they fail? And that is, no worries. Thank you so much for coming. And that is my experience. See, I did not try everything to get and stay sober, but my experience is everything that I tried failed. And it says, but we could not. Again, is that my experience, that I could not find that easier, softer way? And it says, with all the earnestness at our command, we beg of you to be fearless and the thorough from the very start. With all the sincerity that we can muster, we're begging of you to be fearless and thorough from the get-go. Dive in, do this thing to the best of your ability. They're not mincing words. They're saying, dive in, do this to the best of your ability. And then it says, some of us have tried to hold on to our old ideas. And the result was nil. Nil is nothing. The result is I got nothing from it. It did not work until we let go. Absolutely. And so what are some of those old ideas that I might come to? Well, it might be old ideas about the nature of God or higher power. It might be old ideas about what I think the steps look like, or I don't want to make amends to that jerk. Or it might be old ideas about, I don't want to do this thing for the rest of my life. Or who will I be, without these defects of character, whatever it is. Those things that I'm holding on to as resistance to diving in. And that's really what we're at this point. We're at this precipice of change, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. And so what we're asked to is to let go absolutely. And the third step, we're just laying down the foundation for the third step. But the third step really is this leap of faith into this way of life, into these 12 steps. And that, at least for me, is what it has meant to let go absolutely. It says, remember that we deal with alcohol, cunning, baffling, powerful. Without help, it is too much for us. And that's my step one, right? Step one, that alcohol, it's cunning, it's baffling, it's powerful. What does that mean? For alcohol to be cunning, baffling, powerful, well, of course, there is, once I start to drink, I need more and I need more, and I'm drinking myself into consequences. I'm crossing these lines in the sand, and I'm doing these things that I never wanted to do, of course. But also the cunning, baffling, powerful nature of alcoholism and of alcohol for an alcoholic is that despite all those things, despite all the consequences, despite how many times I burnt my life to the ground and I hurt people I never wanted to hurt, I go back to it. Time and time and time again, I go back to it. And it's my experience that without help on my own and all of those things that I tried, it was too much for me. That I couldn't overcome this on my own. I couldn't overcome this on human power. I couldn't overcome this with all the things that I tried. And it says, but there is one who has all power. And that's good news, because in step one, I am powerless, but there is one who has all power, that one. And I want to point out capital O, one, another synonym that we can use for God. That one is God. And that's our step two. Just believing that there is a power, and that power is greater than my alcoholism. It says, may you find him now. Now, my home group, we meet and we actually read the original manuscript. Not all of it. We read most of the original manuscript of how it works. And one of the things is it's a lot more direct. And that's kind of, the way we like it. Pew, pew, like direct. And in that reading of the original manuscript, before it was edited, it said, you must find him now. And that really is the dilemma that I'm at that third step, that I am without power and I will relapse if I don't gain access to that power, and I must find a way to access that power. It goes on to say, half measures availed us nothing. And we say that in the rooms, right? Half measures, and it kind of loses its meaning. And what I want to point out too is there's this group, and it's called YPAA, and it's young people in AA, and it's a lot of fun, and it's young at heart. You don't have to be under a certain age to be a part of it. And they put on conferences, and it's to create service, and it's a lot of fun. And when you go to these conferences, people will read how it works, and then the body of the hall will shout back things during how it works. And I'm going to point out some of the things that they shout at YPAA, because again, it kind of helps illuminate what we're talking about. So at a YPAA convention, the person reading how it works will say, half measures availed us nothing. And the body of the hall will cry out, not even half, right? But isn't that what I kind of think? Don't I kind of think that doing half the work will get me half the results? Half measures will get me some, I'll just do some of it. No, doing some of it gets me nothing and nothing is drunk. See, if I do not have a spiritual awakening and I do not grow that spiritual awakening, I am doomed to drink again. So again, half measures availed us nothing. That's not good news. And again, I was one of those, I'm like, but I mean, like, can I get a third out of it? You know, just like doing some math. Fractions. If you didn't come for the sports, stay for the fractions. All right. And so it says, we stood at the turning point. And this moment, this third step moment becomes the turning point of my life. This is where I'm turning my life in a whole new direction. And that direction is the 12 steps. And again, it's not a set it and forget it deal. I'm not going to crock-pot this thing. It's a way of life. And then it says, we ask his protection and care with complete abandon. And for those that have been around the study, you'll know it. Wherever it says we ask, that's a prayer. There's a prayer in how it works. You'll know that. I didn't know that for years. Yeah, when I saw that, it was the coolest thing. I'm like, oh, it's a prayer. And again, for those who have been coming and listening, you guys know I love my sneaky prayers. And I love that prayer. Because it really, when I have to take a leap of faith, not just the third step, but any leap of faith, any spiritual action, let's say it's an amends that I'm scared to make. Let's say it's, you know, a fifth step I'm scared to do. This is a beautiful prayer to use. God, I ask your protection and care with complete abandon. And how I look at this moment is it really is like I'm standing on the edge of a cliff. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to dive off that cliff. It's a leap of faith. And I shared this at a meeting not long ago. But one of the gifts of sobriety is having my niece and my nephew back in my life. And well, not back in my life, in my life. You know, they've never seen me drink. They've never seen me use. And you know, it's been such a blessing. And when they were both toddlers, they would do this thing that toddlers do. And parents or even babysitters, nieces, you guys know, toddlers will do this. They'll do this thing where they'll climb up on the edge of the couch or some other piece of furniture. It's just a little too high for them to be on, right? And then they'll stand and then they'll do this thing, which I know as Auntie Page catch, and they'll jump, right? And then I have got to do that thing where it's like, oh, don't drop the toddler. And of course, I'm an alcoholic, so I got a coffee in my hand. You know what I mean? Like, don't drop the toddler. And they were able to jump without a second's hesitation. They were able to jump with that complete abandon. And I always look, why? Why were they able to jump without hesitation? Because you get me something on something high, I'm not super fixing to jump off that real quickly. You know what I mean? And that is actually a gift of God in the 12 steps, that I don't want to jump off a high thing. I didn't even mean that to be a reference, but yeah, that truly is the power of God in my life. But why are these kids able to do that so freely? And it is because in their experience, they have never been dropped. And see, what I don't know at this point in the 12 steps, in this point in my journey, in this point in the book, what I don't know is that I'm not diving into an abyss. It feels like it, especially when I look at the steps and I'm judging them and I don't want to do it. It looks like I'm diving into this abyss, but really where I'm diving is in God's hands. And that's one of those themes that I love again and again in this book. One of my favorite promises is on page 100. And it says the things that came to us when we put ourselves in God's hands were better than anything that we could have imagined. Again, on page 124, it talks about how that in God's hands, the dark past becomes our principal asset. And even in page 120 in the chapter 2 Wives, when it's one of the only places in the book where it talks about relapse after an alcoholic has come into contact with AA, the 12 steps. And it talks about if a repetition is to be avoided, place the outcome along with everything in God's hands. And that's where it all needs to be. And there's this other reference of God's hands in step 9, where it's the gentleman who stole the money and lied about it. And he realized he had to put the outcome in God's hands. Right? That is where I'm diving into with these 12 steps, God's hands. But I don't know that at this point. And so it goes on to say, here are the steps we took. And I love that because you'll notice all the steps are written in plural past tense. We admitted, came to believe, made a decision, made, right? What we're talking about is here are the actions that we did. This isn't some ivory tower intellectual saying this is what you ought to do. No, this is our combined experience. And the more of us who follow these directions and do this work, this again becomes our combined experience. And it says, which are suggested as a program of recovery. Yes, it is a suggestion, but I will gently point out that we don't have a plan B. You know, if you're like, I don't like those suggestions, fair enough. I wasn't super jazzed about them either. We don't have like a diet option, you know. A diet option is half measures and that'll kill me. So I don't got diet 12 step, you know what I mean? I got this, right? But it is suggested. And so one, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. And so when we look at that, what does it mean for my life to be unmanageable, right? And what does it mean to be powerless over alcohol? Well, that powerless over alcohol is what we spoke about, that I can't drink and control the amount that I take. And so when I drink, I destroy my life, but I also can't stay sober on my own power. And that creates that unmanageable life where I can't drink, but I can't stay sober. And I can't stay sober, but I can't drink. And my mental obsession is fueled by that spiritual malady, by the bedevilments that we read a couple weeks ago, where I feel this feeling of uselessness. I'm full of self-pity and fear, and I can't be of real use to other people. That is what my unmanageable life looks like. Step 2, it says, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. A little review from the last couple of weeks. Step 2 is just asking that I believe that there is a power greater than myself. Step 2, part 2, that power can restore me to sanity. And what it means to be restored to sanity is to have that mental obsession removed. That insane thought that tells me I can drink again is gone. And I don't believe the lie. That's what we're talking about. Step 3, and that's what we're doing here, is we're laying down the foundation before we can make our third step decision. Step 3, it said, made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. And one of the things that I want to point out is the third step. Now, I don't want to use the word just, because it's kind of a monumental decision, but that's what it is, a decision. See, the third step is a decision to turn my will and my life over to the care of God. I haven't turned my will and my life over in the third step. I'm deciding to. And how do we turn our will and our lives over to the care of God? The rest of the steps, as a way of life, like my life depends on it. Bad news, turns out it does, right? Good news, we have a solution, right? And I just always want to emphasize care of God. Care of God, that my will and my life will be cared for. Imagine all those things that you've cared for in your life and how you felt for them. Cared for a child, cared for a pet, cared for a loved one, cared. And see, if I am not sure if I will be cared for, what I can do is I can look at all the promises throughout this book. And not just looking at them, deeper than that, when I experience those promises in my own life, that becomes irrefutable evidence of God's care for my will and my life. And to be fair, anyone's going to do a better job than me with my will and my life. All I'm saying is the track record for me running my will and my life is quite poor, quite poor. Like it is not good. So almost anyone could do better. But we're gonna turn it over to the most loving, caring entity that could possibly take care of it. 4, made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. I was kind of hoping it would be of everyone else, darn it, I was real good at taking theirs. Turns out I got to take mine. And in the fifth step, step 5, it says, admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being, the exact nature of our wrongs. And that's one of those things that I want to point out. When we come to that fifth step, you know, my very first ever fifth step, my sponsor at the time, she said there's 2 types of people, Paige. There's people like my sponsor at the time, and she said, like me, who stand on the pile of garbage and is like, yeah, I made this mess. I'm a hardcore alcoholic. Woo, you know, and then there's people like you who hide under the mess and think you're the worst piece of garbage that ever lived. But I want to point out, it says another human being, regardless of the mess, regardless of the pile of garbage, we really are shoulder to shoulder, another human being. And one of the things that I love is that word admitted. See, there's 2 ways to look at the word admitted. One is a bit of a confession. I always like to make the joke, I need to confess that I stole your car, I slept with your husband, and I peed on your carpet. You know, a bit of a confession. And then I make the joke, I would never. It was linoleum. But I love seeing that. Yeah. But another way to look at admitted is, let's say we're going to that baseball game and we're going to see that pitcher balk and we're going to see the batter go to first base, right? And on my ticket to go to the baseball stadium, what is it going to say? It's going to say admit 1. So another way to look at the word admit is to be let in. So in the 5th step, when I'm sharing the contents of my 4th step inventory, I'm letting in that power which is God, and I'm letting in that light, and I'm letting in another human being. And then it says we're entirely ready to have God remove. Step 6, we're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. And what I really want to emphasize is God is the one doing the removing. It is not me. I am absolutely incapable of removing them. That is God's deal. And my job in step 6 is just to be willing. Step 7, humbly asked him to remove our shortcomings. And one of the questions that sometimes we ask when we look at 6 and 7 and we look at 5 is like, what's the difference between the exact nature of our wrongs, our defects of character, and our shortcomings? And the simple answer is nothing. That they are the exact same thing. And Bill just didn't want to use the same word over and over and over again, because it gets a little redundant. Because it wouldn't make sense if I would share with you one thing in the 5th step, become willing for God to remove a completely separate thing in the 6th step, and then ask for God to take a completely separate 3rd thing in the 7th step. And that's, and again, if you come to it with a different view, that's okay. I'm wrong, you're right, it's okay. But for me, that's how that flows. It says 8, made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. Man, I haven't gotten out of this willingness deal yet. Sounds like I got to be super willing. Ask me if I was willing at the beginning. 6 all about willingness, 8 all about willingness. Sounds like willingness is my business. Defect removal, none of my business. 9, made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. 10, continued. And I got some bad news about continued. See, when I got here, it said continued. When I was 5 years sober, it said continued. 10 years sober, said continued. Today, continued. Man, that means I'm not done. Darn it, I have to continue, right? Continue to take personal inventory, and some more bad news when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. Kind of hoping it was an if. Turns out I am wrong. When. And promptly gives us a direction on that timeline. Prompt, quickly, with some expediency. Yes. 11, sought through prayer and meditation to improve. Also annoyingly, sought, it's seek. So again, never done seeking. Improve, again, continued. I'm not done. And it says prayer and meditation. For a long time, I read that as or. I thought it was prayer and or meditation, you just pick and choose, Nope, it's an and. It's a solid and there. And it says to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood him. And remember that word conscious in Latin means with knowing. So that with knowing of God, to improve that with knowing of God. And it says praying only for knowledge of his will for us and the power to carry that out. And that's what I meant to pray for. God, what is your will for me, and help me to do your will? And we'll see that as we read some of the structured prayers as well as the sneaky prayers. That's really the direction that they're taking. How can I best serve God and the people about me? 12. And step 12 is broken down to 3 parts. So there's a promise, there's working with others, and there's not being a jerk to everyone. There's a politer way of saying that, but step 12, having had a spiritual awakening is the result of these steps. That is a promise. So if I do these steps to the best of my ability, I will have a spiritual awakening. That is promise. And also, one of the things that I want to point out is the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous must be alcoholic proof. They must be. Otherwise, we could not do them. So it's just one of those things when I work with people who've been in and out, who are struggling, it's like, man, I can't get there. No, we can. We can. If I do this work to the best of my ability, this experience will happen for me. And it says, we tried to carry this message. And what is this message? It is the spiritual awakening is the result of the 12 steps. It's alcoholics. And this is to practice these principles. And what are these principles? Well, the principles are the actions of the steps. So to practice these actions, to practice this way of life in all our affairs, that doesn't mean we get to have affairs. What that means is in all areas of our lives. I am kind of referencing YPAA, where they're like, we have affairs, you know. All right, and it says, many of us exclaimed. So again, it is meeting us where we're at. If we're looking at these steps and we're feeling a little overwhelmed, many of us exclaimed, what an order, I can't go through with it. Now, if we were at a YPAA meeting, the crowd would shout, I'm so discouraged, to which the person reading would say, don't be discouraged. So again, meeting us where we're at. It says, no one among us has been able to maintain anything like perfect adherence to these principles. All of us fall short. All of us fall off the beam. And that's one of those things. We all fall off the beam. We all fall off those daily disciplines. We all, sit on a step or are afraid to make an amends. All of us have had that experience a time or two. And it's not about falling off. It is about how quickly we get back onto those spiritual actions. That's what matters. And it says so if we're at a YPAA meeting, we would yell out, but we're saints, followed by, we are not saints. Oh, what's the point? Well, the point is we're willing to grow along spiritual lines. And I love that. I love that line, we are not saints. And the reason I love that is one of the things, there's many spiritual teachers. And I really like borrowing from different spiritual and different faith traditions to just really explore and deepen my step 11 practice. And there's a gentleman who described what a saint really is as being who you were truly meant to be, who God truly intended you to be. And this is a joke. And I would joke with sponsees. And when they would give me compliments, because those that know me know that I'm not great at accepting compliments. It's not my forte. And so I would do this thing, it's a defect, and I would deflect with humor. So somebody would say something nice to me, and I would say, oh, you just put me on a dollar store candle, which is to say, yeah, oh, I should be a saint, right? And I was joking about that. And it would be kind of a thing that we would laugh about with sponsees. But I was doing a meditation one day, and I had this very serious thought in my meditation about the silly idea. And my goal in life is not to be a saint. That's not my goal. And what came to me in meditation, that my goal in life was to be the type of person where those that I work with and those that I help and those who I come into contact with, that they can become saints in their own lives. Again, what we're talking about there is becoming who they were truly meant to be, and that I could be an agent of change for them in their life. But what it's saying is that we are not saints, and that we're not perfect, and that we get that idea out of our heads. We're not going to be perfect. And so it says the point is we are willing to grow along spiritual lines. So what are the spiritual lines in which I'm trying to grow along? Well, those spiritual lines are just what we saw, the 12 steps. That's what I'm trying to grow along. And it says the principles, these 12 steps, they are the principles. The principles we have set down are guides to progress. We claim spiritual progress rather than spiritual perfection. And one of my defects is that I can be pedantic. And pedantic is when you're really particular about some meaningless thing, particular detail for no good reason. But I really, really always emphasize that it is spiritual progress, not spiritual progress, not spiritual, rather than spiritual perfection, as opposed to progress, not perfection. Right? Spiritual progress, not spiritual perfection, as opposed to progress, not perfection. And the reason why I really emphasize that is because how often have I or we seen people confuse the gifts of recovery with recovery itself? But I'm progressing. I've got the job back. I've got the family back. I've got the car back. I've got the house back. I've got these material things back. I'm progressing. But that's not what is asked of me. It is asked, how am I progressing spiritually? And that is the benchmark, and that is what matters, to grow spiritually. And I have my 1930s dictionary, and I like to look up words in it. And there's a number of definitions of perfection. And one is similar to the definition that we would have today, like in a state of absolute, like perfect purity. But one of the definitions of perfection is to be in a state without sin. Now, if you hear that word and you're like, whoa, I would be too, so don't worry. So to be in a state without sin, we can reframe that word sin with defect, just that stuff in me that's cutting me off from God. So that idea that we claim spiritual progress, so I'm meant to grow spiritually, but I'm not spiritually perfect, which would be to be at a place without any defects of character. That's what it's talking about. And it says our description of the alcoholic, and that we saw in more about alcoholism, right? The chapters to the agnostic, that laid down the details and the information and the questions for step 2, and our personal adventures, our own experience. Before and after make clear 3 pertinent ideas. Now, these are 3 pertinent ideas that I, as an alcoholic, I need to be convinced of. And it says, A, that we were alcoholic and could not manage our own lives. So I need to be convinced of my alcoholism, and I need to be convinced that I can't run my life. And that is a step 1 proposition. B, that probably no human power could have relieved our alcoholism. Right? And human power is the love of family, the love of a partner, a spouse. It is things like human power is the best psychiatrist, the best psychologist, the best treatment centers, heck, even the best sponsor. That is a human power. And that no human power could have relieved my alcoholism. That's also a step 1 proposition. And then it says that God could and would if he were sought. And that is a step 2 proposition, that God can and will, that God can and will relieve me of this insane thought to take that first drink. Now, I was referencing the original manuscript. Now, in the original manuscript, now we don't read this part at my home group because it would be a little too confrontational, and it is really good that they took this out of the book, but I thought it was interesting. In the original manuscript, it says, if you are not convinced of these vital issues, you ought to reread the book to this point or throw it away, which, fair enough, is a little intense. So it's good they took it out. But what is asked of me is to be convinced of the step 1 and step 2 propositions. And so that then leads us to being convinced we were at step 3. that I've got my step 1 and I've got my step 2, and I'm ready to make this decision. I'm ready to take this leap of faith. I'm ready to dive into these 12 steps as a way of life. And there's more reading that we'll do around step 3, and we'll do it next week. So I want to thank you for the opportunity to be of service, and wrap it up and pick it up there next week.